And as we continue on in week 7 of Capital Outlook, we are pleased now to be joined by the majority floor leaders of the Wyoming legislature, Senator Dan Dockstader and Representative Eric Barlow. To you both, welcome.
Good morning. Yes.
It's been an interesting week here in the Wyoming, the temporary Wyoming Capitol. I want to begin our discussion with House Bill 220. Representative Barlow, it's a bill you supported, and that was the Retail Fairness Act that I'm talking about. It went down in committee Tuesday night. It earmarked approximately $45 million to education, and that bill is no longer. What are your thoughts today when we're visiting here on Wednesday?
I think in the end, what the House, the majority of the House, believed that it was a discussion that needed to be had. So we sent it to our Senate colleagues. And as you know, in the by Wyoming Constitution, all revenue bills start in the House. So the House gets the first whack at them. And so the House moved it forward to our Senate colleagues, and they've fortunately, folks have had more time to think about it. Whether the process, when you have a delay, sometimes maybe that's not the best thing. Keep things moving and you have more continuity. But the delay gave people more time to reflect. And now there's concerns, and my Senate colleagues, are working through those concerns. And I'm certainly not going to speak for them and the things that they're hearing, but we've been communicating with them and trying to let them know where we are as the House and how we came to our conclusions. But certainly they have the prerogative to vet the bill, and we respect that. And I think it's a little unfortunate some of the way it went, but I respect that they have that right.
From what you know today, would you still support the bill?
Yes, I would.
We had watched the whole process, and especially after it's almost kind of a difficult situation where the House has to start these difficult bills, they're tax bills, then we pick them up as they come across, and over time you could see the lack of support coming from across the state. Maybe not so much corporations tax as it was just the concept of more taxing. And so when it arrived on our side of the building, we signed it to the committee, but the momentum had reached a point where people were hearing from their constituents and saying, is this the route we want to go? So going into committee, we saw that the votes were not there. And so that was, it came to a halt at that point. Well-written bill, it's well vetted, well gone through, but I wouldn't say so much it's the corporation that we're looking at, it's the concept of the tax. You move out into the rural communities of Wyoming, and they're a little bit uncomfortable with additional taxes when they still see that we're involved in spending that they question. We still have reserves, and the concept of adding a new tax in that climate is difficult to accept.
We heard last week from a good discussion with two members of the Joint Appropriations Committee, Representative Larson and Senator Kinski, about the state's education deficit, still today. And this bill, as we noted earlier, had money earmarked for education. How do we solve that deficit, if not for new revenue ideas? Let me start with you, Senator.
I think it's still out there that we can. We have done a lot of work in education looking at the spending there, but I think there's still an opportunity to find some savings there. Do we go to our communities and say, they see our schools, great programs, good teachers, it's all working very well, but they question, do we continue to add taxes to keep everything going, or do we take even a harder look at what we're spending there? And so at this point, we have to say, have we completely studied everything in terms of making sure that we're running a refined operation? I don't want to pull back on the good work of the schools, but at the same time, we really have to, we're living in a different climate. We don't have the discretional funds that we once had.
Can you identify for us what cuts in your mind are still out there for schools, which now have experienced significant cuts, most would say?
Now, they're separate budgets, the construction and all of that, but I think we really have to look hard at the money we spend on construction, but granted, there are separate budgets. But what I hear from our schools, there's still room to make the cuts, but don't ask us right away to do it. Let us work through it, and we can find those areas where there's discretionary money, and we can make it work at the local level. I think our schools understand the situation, but they don't need to be forced to do it right away. We need to have it kind of taper off and reassess what we're doing. we're doing it in a climate where we're losing students in some places because of the changing mineral economy. What do we do with those situations? We put a lot of money into schools and infrastructure across the state, but now the mineral economy is changing too. We'll find a solution.
Representative Barlow, what are you thinking today without this new money that might be earmarked for education?
So first of all, I think we have reserves, so we have a path forward for the next couple years to maintain, I think, the quality education we have. My concern is with the smallest districts, 48 school districts in the state of Wyoming, but those that are 700 students or less, 500, 300, those are the ones that really don't have the capacity to absorb big cuts. And so, much like we do for towns in small towns, is we help them a little more than we do the larger communities because they don't have the tax base. And schools are funded on property tax. I mean, let's face it, that's where we fund schools. And so in those smaller communities, they don't have the property tax base. So the state's helping them. Bigger communities such as Sublette County or Campbell County, where we have lots of revenues coming out, they're actually feeding into that system to help those smaller. But so we can look for efficiencies, and I have no problem with that. I have no problem with doing things better. Virtual education, there's lots of things that we can do, I think, that help us deliver a quality education to our students and hopefully provide value, i.e. lower cost, good instruction, good quality. But the smaller schools, at least that's what I'm concerned about, is the Glen Rocks, the Uptons, those Lusk, those small school districts don't have the capacity. So when we start talking about efficiencies, we'll be really careful that we're not actually, starving some of them out, completely out. And that's where I don't have any problem. The bigger districts have capacity, the small ones just don't. And that's where I get concerned.
So if we let things settle down for a year or two, what's the best way as leaders that the state should be looking at its revenue needs in this declining mineral revenue cycle that we're in?
I think we go back in and look at the way we're spending those reserves. We put out a concurrence on the budget, but I can tell you there were concerns on the floor that we were still spending too much, and we saw people pull back their votes because they don't feel that we have the spending taken care of yet, as you heard from our appropriations chair. We haven't completely finished addressing that. And consequently, we're seeing an increase in the no votes on the budget each year because of that feeling that, have we got that spending under control? We have to fully address that. In the climate of talking new taxes, we have to address the spending.
When will this legislature be able to say, or can it ever, that we've cut all we can cut?
In my own business, I ask that, and we still continue to cut. And we still continue to put out a product. We live within our means.
Does our means mean growth to you? Wyoming has tried to not only diversify its tax structure, there's been a lot of emphasis given on growing its economy. Are those two congruent with one another?
We're trying to do that in the tech industry, in the medical industry. We're trying new technology. That's not going to happen right away. You're not going to replace that mineral dollar as it has supported our schools, our towns, as it's supported the whole state for many years. You're not going to replace that right away.
There's two challenges. One is the revenue side, and I think people need to understand where actually the dollars come from in the state of Wyoming. And they come from energy. I mean, the majority of the dollars we have are from energy. And there are challenges within that industry. So if there are challenges within that industry and our revenues from that industry are tapering or stagnating, then we have to have a discussion about, are we looking for new revenues, i.e. modernizing our tax structure, or are we willing to say we want less services? And we start talking about the human services, well, that can be education or healthcare or whatever, folks tend to be pretty reticent about changing that, or Department of Corrections. So look at the big 5 agencies that we have, and those are things that folks feel pretty passionately about. and a majority of folks, maybe not all of them on all of them. I mean, everybody doesn't value each one of them equally, but they want to keep those services. They want to keep those, what we do with the state, whether it's corrections or Department of Health or our roads or, whatever those things are. So it's probably two things. In my mind, it's two things longer term is we need to have we need our citizens to have a better understanding of what our tax structure is, what we rely on, what you and I, the benefit we get from right now our mineral industry, and what that looks like going out, what the projections are. We do a CREG, and it's it gets updated every so often. But are we really looking out there 5 or 10 years? We're really forecasting out there to say where we are. On the same time, we need to do the same thing with our expenses, because when we see the convergence and revenues are going down and expenses are going up, we need to make those adjustments. We need to have that conversation. But I think it's a bigger conversation than, quite honestly, we can have at the legislature in one session or two sessions. It's a 5-10 year discussion to get to that place where you find those balances. I don't know, it's going to take some leadership. I think it's going to take some executive branch leadership. I'm looking forward to seeing how Governor Gordon approaches his budget process, and then how the legislature may adjust our own approach to the budget. We talk about, folks don't think we've made enough cuts. Well, sometimes we can't get to it because the process stands in the way. And if we can start adjusting our own process and informing and educating ourselves better and all of Wyoming better about both the revenue side and the expense side, I think we can get to a different place. And I would hope it'd be a better place, so we have better balance between the revenue expectations and realities, by the way, and our budget and our policy wants. And there are policy needs too. I mean, let's be careful. There are needs we have, but there are some things that we would categorize, different people would categorize differently as these are wants, not needs. And we got to have that discussion. And I think that's fair, but I think that's a 3 to 5 year discussion with an engaged executive branch and a legislature and a citizenry that really wants to be a part of that.
On to your roles as majority floor leaders. I think you both should wear Fitbits if you don't already, because I think you walk around the room more than most legislators do. Has the role been what you thought it was going to be? You decide the order the bills are heard. How have you evolved into that role?
I'll say one thing I appreciate is he comes over, he walks, he does most of the walking. And he'll come over and check with me each morning and say, where are we, what do we do, what do we need to coordinate? And I appreciate that communication.
As far as my role, I think that I try to treat the members in the body, and certainly my colleagues down the hall, fairly. If there's a bill that's important to them, I try to give them consideration. We're looking at the list now. Majority Floor Leader Dockstader and looking at the list the last several days, because we're coming down to crunch time. What are the priorities? Where do we need to concentrate our time to make a difference for citizens of Wyoming? We do a lot of things that are nice bills to get passed, but we do some bills that are important, that really need to advance a cause or something meaningful on behalf of citizens. And that's what we try to prioritize.
What should the Wyoming legislature's primary concern be in the interim? What topic needs the most attention?
In my opinion, I think we need to take a hard look at how we're spending our money. And we need to go through that 3 to 5 year process and find a solution. We have a good governor in place to do that. He's intelligent on such matters, and now's our opportunity to move forward and find some solutions there.
I think it is the spending, but my interest is more on the process, to how we get to a better discussion, a more robust discussion about how we spend the money. Because I would respectfully say, in my 6 years in the legislature, now in my 7th session, the process actually stands in the way of having the most robust discussions about priorities. And I think there's ways we can adjust that. And I'll be bringing some of those suggestions to Management Council and to modify just how we discuss the budget, not just whether we spend money or don't spend money, but how we actually get to those discussions. So that'll be for me. However, that budget is important, but I think we still got healthcare opportunities we can address. I think there's still the education things that need to be will be important during the interim. But certainly, as we're going into next year's a budget session, the budget, i.e. with all of those different components, that's what's going to be the focus of our legislative work this coming summer and fall.
Well, to you both, it's been a good discussion, and I think an important discussion. I appreciate your time with us on Capitol Outlook. Representative Eric Barlow and Senator Dan Dockstader, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having
Morning.
us.